Okay, we've started.
Brilliant. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Researchfish Interoperability webinar. I'm Claire Wooding. I'm the Customer Success Team Lead for Researchfish. So joined this morning by my colleagues Alexandra, also from the Customer Success team, Colin Millerchip, our Product Manager, who will be leading the webinar, and Gavin Reddick, our Chief Analyst. Colin, I'll hand over to you to get started.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks everybody for finding time today to come and join us. I'm just going to get a few screens moved around. So we are going to record this. So I hope that's okay with everybody. And Gavin, has that recording already started? Yeah, okay. Right, let me share my screen. So I'm going to start off just by talking through a few slides as a bit of background, and then I'll go on to do a demonstration of the functionality. Then there'll be time for questions. Please feel free to use the Q&A to pull together your questions. I'm going to rely on my colleagues to flag if there's a question that we need to answer whilst I'm going through the demo, but if not, then we'll try to answer those questions at the end. So with that said, hopefully I am now sharing a screen. So, as everybody knows, a key goal of Researchfish is to reduce the reporting burden on researchers. So one way we do this is to ensure that outcomes reported into other systems can be brought into Researchfish with minimal effort by researchers. We have several mechanisms for this. We have the harvesting mechanisms from sites like Crossref and PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science, DataCite, OpenAir. We have personal harvesting. That's the term we use when the harvesting comes from sites such as ORCID, and where we use mechanisms such as Scopus author IDs, where we know the person, but we don't know the grant attribution. So those outcomes that are brought into Researchfish, the researchers need to add grant attributions. And then we have the RO interoperability mechanism, which allows research organization admins to add outcomes into Researchfish from CRIS or other similar systems on behalf of their researchers. So today our focus is going to be on that RO interoperability mechanism. And over the last 6 months, we've made several improvements, which I'm going to describe now. So historically, to be able to add a publication into Researchfish via this mechanism, you have needed to know the grant attribution information. So which grant funded the research that generated this publication. And the thing that we're going to focus on today is looking at the change we've made by introducing a concept called researcher records. And this means that if you have publications where you don't know the grant attribution information, but you know the researcher, you're now able to use the RO interoperability mechanism to bring those publications into Researchfish. We've always been able to bring in publications where we have a DOI from Crossref or PubMed, but over the last few months, we've added support for DataCite DOIs. These are for publications, but also for some other outcome types, specifically for audio, visual, and image, dataset, and software outputs. The interoperability mechanism would work for the RO, the research organization where the award holder is based. But it's now possible if you are named as an other organization on the grant, which can be done by the funder, then you're also now able to use this interoperability mechanism. And that's the situation that may well happen if, for example, an award is held by a PI at another institute, but members of your organization are part of the research team that's funded by the research. And then finally, this capability has only been available to those research organizations that have subscribed to the administrator license, but we are now making it freely available to all research organizations. And we've been reaching out to as many as we can to make them aware of this. So I'm going to focus on researcher records because the other changes really fit into existing workflows, but researcher records bring a sort of a new entity and a new workflow into Researchfish. So researcher records are a new entity in Researchfish. And just as is the case for categories that are created by research organizations, researcher records are owned by research organizations. They're not shared with other Researchfish funders or other research organizations. And they're used to create an association between a researcher and a research organization. So previously, if you were using the RO interoperability capability, the way that this would work is that outputs would be added into a spreadsheet. So over here, I've got a screenshot of a spreadsheet. And this is just an example to show that you would have a row for a publication, and you would indicate who the funder was and the grant information. And the interoperability mechanism would use this to identify the grant and associate the publication with the grant and make it available within the researcher's personal portfolio. But now outputs can be added, and if you do not know the funding and grant information, you can instead use an ID that's a way of identifying the researcher record. And this is how we then make a connection from publications through to the researcher record and into the personal portfolio of the researcher. Now, it's important to note that where the interoperability uploader makes use of these researcher record IDs rather than funder and grant IDs, then the outcome isn't attributed to an award. So this is like those other personal harvest mechanisms I mentioned earlier, ORCID and using Scopus author IDs, and the researcher will need to add the award attributions themselves. So if you do have funding and grant information associated with publications, we recommend that you still use this when adding outcomes via the interoperability uploader. Okay, so let me find my screen. Okay, so now I am going to do what everybody always loves, which is to do a live demo. Live demos have never gone wrong in the history of software. So hopefully now I am sharing Researchfish. Let me just move things out of the way. So I'm now viewing Researchfish, and I'm looking at it as though I'm seeing the view that you would see as a research organization. At least we can see the main things that you can see as a research organization. So we now have a couple of new screens. So this first one, when it loads, is where I can see researcher records that have already been created. And I can see some information about the researcher record, and we'll talk about this information in a bit more detail coming up. I can see the status as to whether the researcher has accepted the invitation. This is also where I can, if I want to, create researcher records individually or via a bulk upload mechanism. So I'm going to look at the bulk upload mechanism and introduce you to it. And that will take us to another screen where I can download a template, populate it with information, and then upload it. Now I actually have I've got some examples already prepared. So here is one which I'm going to open. Give you a sense of comes up. Just cancel that for now. So this is the sort of information. This is the information that you would put into one of documents, and this is the information we need to be able to create a researcher records, make it a bit larger. So you would provide some form of an internal ID, and this is going to be used as part of the interoperability process. And this could come from, for example, it could come from a CRIS system or another internal system. It could be a brand new ID that you've decided to create for this particular process. You provide some details about the person, the email address is used to contact them, and then we also have some start and end dates. These are mostly used for future plans. The end date is optional. The start date would typically be the date that the person started working in your organization. Again, all of this data is data that you control, that you see. It's not data that's shared with any other funders or researchers in research organization, in Researchfish, excuse me. Now, if I go back to this process, I'm going to upload this file. And I don't know if you spotted, actually, I'll just bring the file back onto screen, but actually I've consciously created errors in this file just to give you a sense of the validation that happened. So we're missing an email address and we've got an invalid date. So let's pick that file again and actually upload it this time. And then what Researchfish does, it basically does some level of validation. And so if it finds problems at this point, the ones that I've mentioned are just a couple of examples, but you might be using an ID for the second time. So you have to, obviously IDs have to be unique. Then you can either fix them up here, or you could delete the records, or you could cancel the whole upload process. And then you can send the, when you hit when you're done, you will save and send the invitations, and those will go out straight away to your researchers. Now, this bulk mechanism, because thousands of researcher records can be uploaded via this mechanism, this bulk upload mechanism actually creates a queue, uses a queue. And for the purposes of this webinar, I don't want us to sit here and wait for the queue to process it. Usually only takes about a minute, but instead I'll show you the other way of creating them, which is I'm going to create a record manually. So I'm just going to open off screen the spreadsheet, because I'm going to use the data that's in here for one of the records. I'm going to create it manually. So I'm going to create a record for a member of research staff. Use just an email address that will make sure that the invitation comes to me. I'm going to use an internal ID. I'll put a start date in. Okay. So when I hit send, assuming I've done this right, we'll get notification that the record has been sent. And we can see the status. So this is the one that I've just created for Dr. David Porter, and he has been invited but has not yet accepted the invitation. Now, that has created an email, which I have received. I will open and bring on screen. So I'm first of all, I'm going to log out of this account, because what I am now going to do is I am going to accept this invitation, and I'm going to log in with an existing account. So if I click to accept this invitation, it'll take me to Researchfish, and just as happens with somebody receives an award invitation, I have the option to either create a Researchfish account if I don't already have one, or log in with an existing one. So I'm going to log in with an existing one. So I already have an account. I'm going to enter a username, then a password, log into this account. And this is the experience from the researcher. They receive a notification explaining that they've accepted this and why they've accepted it. I should have said earlier that we've got product documentation, and one of the, as well as a walkthrough video. And one of the things that we recommend is, ahead of sending these invitations, that you communicate to your researchers to let them know this is going to happen. So hopefully your communication will align with what they see here. And this is really the totality of all the researchers have to do. They just have to accept the invitation and go to their awards. I've just realized, in fact, I did have a slide which I managed to have skipped over, which I'm going to drag onto screen now, which would, in a summary, explain the workflow. Apologies for that. So the workflow very simply is that you create the information about your researchers. You run through the process that I've just done, which is to create the researcher records and send invitations. And then when the invitation is received, it's accepted, and if necessary, the researcher will create an account as they need to. And you can monitor and resend these invitations as you go. So as a researcher, I've accepted that invitation. Here I am logged in as Dr. David Porter. And the only place where I really see anything about this is on my awards page. We have a list of any researcher records that they have accepted, because this creates no additional reporting burden. So we make them aware that it exists, but these are really a tool for you to use as part of the RO interoperability process. Now, if I come and look at this account, just so you know, because we're going to do a before and after now. If I come and look in this account and look in the personal portfolio, I will see that I currently have no publications added into this account. Okay, so we've created the researcher record, that's sent an invitation. The researcher has accepted the invitation. So now we're going to make use of that researcher record in the RO interoperability process. So I shall log out of this account, and I'll log back in with the account I was previously using that allowed me to act like a research organization. And I am going to upload this file of publications. Let me just get it onto screen. And so this file has got 5 publications that I wish to add. 2 of them are going to be added using the existing mechanism where we do know the grant award. And so this grant is one that's held by the researcher we were just looking at. And then 3 of them are going to be added using the researcher record ID that I created. So if I come now and look back at the list of researcher records, you can see that the one that we sent to David Porter has this ID ending in 02. That's the same ID we're going to use here. And we can see that the status is accepted. And we need researchers to accept these IDs because it's them giving you permission to be able to use the interoperability uploader. So we're all set. I'll just close that document. And so now we're going to use the same interoperability uploader that's been around for quite some time, but we're going to use it now with a mix of records that will be added where we do have grant attributed information and some where we don't have that information, and we'll now use the researcher record as a way of identifying the right place within Researchfish for these records to be added. So I shall choose that file. And I will now upload it. Now, this process many of you will be familiar with. What happens now is that this is added to a queue. And when that has been queued, we will receive a notification that we can download a document that will have the feedback. And that will tell us for each of the records whether it's been successfully added. It will provide information as to if it hasn't successfully been added, as to why that may be the case. So it may not have been successfully added, for example, if there were some errors in the data, or if the publication that we're attempting to upload, if that upload would have created a duplicate record. So just as we do elsewhere, we will avoid creating duplicates whenever we can. Now, this upload process can take a little while. So I will keep a quick eye on my email. I'm going to put that to one side so I can keep an eye on it. But in true Blue Peter style, I will show you one that we prepared earlier. So as doing a preparation for this particular run through of the webinar, I did a practice run. And so this was the feedback that I got from that practice run. Let's bring it across onto the screen. And so we have the same fields, and I'll talk through these fields in a bit of detail in just a moment. We'll have the same fields before, but in the fields, these are the ones that we have to provide. These are optional fields with extra information that can be provided. And then we get these response fields, which will help us to understand what actually has happened, what was the name of the publication, if it was found, if the DOI was valid, and then information about the journal, the year, and then also importantly, what happened. And as we can see, for these top two, they were created and attributed to an award, and that's because we had the award details. And for these bottom three, they were created, but they couldn't be attributed to an award. They were instead made available to the researcher via their and see if that has actually finished processing yet. I think it has. Because I ran through this once yesterday already, I did it with a different account. So I will log into that account and show you what the experience is then from the researcher's perspective. Oh, actually, I've just had that notification. There you go. You'll be able to chat along for long enough. So I then get a notification to say that it has processed and I can see the results in my downloads. So I will log back in. Let's log in first of all. And I'll go to my download page. And here we are. It is ready. So I will download it. And so I will get a spreadsheet. Sorry, just getting back onto screen. So here's my spreadsheet. Here's information, each row in the spreadsheet. I get a response. So I can see again, these top two rows, this is where I had the funding and grant information. Again, this then gives me further information about what that actually was in terms of what the article was, what the journal was, and again, was I successful or not? And so as before, as per the example I showed, the top two where we had grant attribution information have been added and attributed. The bottom three have just been added. So now if I log out and I log back in as the researcher, am I still connected? I've just had a little internet glitch, I think. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you now, Colin.
Yes, though you did sort of stutter and freeze for a little bit a minute ago. So I think it has been.
Okay, let's do that again. Apologies for that. What's the password? Right. That's what happens when you upgrade your internet 3 weeks ago. It just gets worse. Okay, so I've logged back in as that researcher for whom we created the researcher record, Porter. So if I come and look at the personal portfolio, you can see that now I have 5 publications, whereas before I had none. And if I come and look in their award, then I can see only 2 publications have been added to the award. And if I come and look at the publication screen, there are the 2 publications that have been added. Here are the 3. that were added to their personal portfolio but not made available in the publications. And obviously, just as they would do normally through the reporting process, they can just add them into awards as necessary. So the demo gods have been relatively kind, apart from an internet hiccup. I am happy now. I'll just check with my colleagues. Was there any aspect that you wanted to draw attention to that I didn't cover, or perhaps went over a little too quickly, or maybe you've seen any questions that were raised in real time?
We do have a number of questions, so we're going to start publishing them, and then I think we can sort of tackle them as we go.
Okay, I'll stop sharing now so that we can have a larger screen.
Okay, so the first question is from Andrew McClellan. So what happens if we create a researcher record with an email address that's different from the one held by UKRI? Will it be possible to merge the accounts somehow or transfer the UKRI awards to the researcher record we've created? So this is a really good question. And in Researchfish, we don't assume that any one organization knows the email address that any other organization is going to use. And so that you should put in the email address that makes sense for you. And as long as it goes to a researcher, so they might have several different email addresses, the key thing is that when they click on the accept the invitation link that Colin showed earlier, they enter their existing username and password, and that binds all of those different individual organizational IDs together. So you don't need to worry about any kind of reconciliation there, and the researcher accepting it is the thing that makes the difference there. So hopefully that's clear. If it's not, please add some extra. Next, Colin, do you want to take this one? So from Paul Thompson.
I presume we need to have the list of awards that need to be updated with the associated staff before we can start this process, as not all staff in a CRIS will have records that need to be added to Researchfish. So yes, you can download the list of awards from Researchfish, and that will give you access to those award details, and that's how you would get hold of that information. Gavin, any more to add to that?
No, I mean exactly right. You can download, and you've got everything that should be covered. Obviously, you might have some people who are co-investigators or others as well, but you know that should be part of the sorts of things you're typically aware of anywhere.
I'll grab the next one as well. I think I'm doing this hopefully in the right chronological order. So this looks like it's from Paul Reeves. Do researchers get a notification when they next log into Researchfish as to what outputs have been uploaded on their behalf and which have been attributed to grants or added to their researcher record and personal portfolio? So this is something that we're actually looking at right now. We have a mechanism currently in the product to encourage them to encourage researchers to look into their personal portfolio and understand what records may have been added since they were last here. But our experience is that this mechanism, it's not one they pay very much attention to. So we're looking to, and so this isn't committed, we're still in discovery, but we think we have an approach that we could get done ahead of sort of the next February and March submission process. And what we're hoping to do is to provide, so when a download has been added, you get a little notification in your menu. And what we're hoping to do is provide a similar notification against your personal portfolio. And then when the researcher would navigate through to the personal portfolio, we would provide more information at that point on the screen about records that have been harvested since they last accessed the system. And that will then enable them to go and view those records. We're looking to also try to extend the filtering and sort mechanism so that those records that have been added are sort of at the top of the list, and then that will encourage them to review those and do the attributions as necessary.
Just so you're looking, you're looking in review. It's in the published one. But so he's a little bit early with that question. But there's another one from Peter Ibbison. Perhaps you could take Colin. Can our administrators customize the invitation email sent to researchers so that it comes from a mailbox rather than a specific individual?
No, at the moment, this isn't something that can be done. The email from that's sent with the invitation comes from the same email address that's used for grant awards, which is why one thing that we would encourage you to do would be to do some communication ahead of time, send an email out to your your researchers to let them know that you're about to invite them to accept a researcher record, to tell them which email address it's going to come from, encourage them to check in their spam folders if they haven't received it, give them a sense of the timescales, and certainly reinforce to them, I would say, that this is a one-time task to accept an invitation. This doesn't increase their reporting workload. It's not a new thing they have to report against. It's a mechanism for you to be able to use to increase the amount that you can do on their behalf to reduce the reporting that they have to do.
Yeah,
apologies, I've picked these out of order, haven't I?
No worries.
Catching me out.
And the invitation email makes it clear to the researchers that this is essentially an active consent mechanism so that you can upload information on their behalf. And it comes from the Researchfish email, so it doesn't come from your personal email if you're the person who's generating it. So it's not from a specific individual.
So hopefully I'm going with the right list now. Gavin, the next one is from Paul Thompson. Am I looking at the right list?
Yes.
Okay, so those academics that don't accept will need to go through the usual process without the ability to bulk upload. That's just a question. So yes, it doesn't create problems if people don't accept the invitations, and you will obviously still be able to do the bulk upload mechanism if you know the grant information. It's for those publication records where you don't know the grant information that you won't be able to take advantage of the researcher record invitation. And because you've got the mechanism within the software to be able to resend invitations, what we imagine will happen is that you will send an email yourselves from your own system telling them that you're going to send researcher record invitations. You'll send the invitations from the Researchfish platform. You'll then be able to monitor who has replied, and then perhaps after a suitable period of time, you might tell them you're going to resend the invitations and resend those. Whether you want 2 emails at that point or not really is down to your communication policy, but you've got the ability to send reminders so that if the email got missed or deleted accidentally, you can encourage them to try to accept the invitation before you then do the interoperability upload mechanism. Andrew McClellan, can you provide details on what additional functionality is included as part of the subscription? Is this information available online somewhere? So just to be absolutely clear, the researcher record capability and the R interoperability capability that we've demonstrated today is freely available and does not require a subscription, although you obviously have to have a Researchfish account. We have additional functionality that, yes, we do have a document. I am literally in the process of updating it because obviously we have just made changes. So when that is available, and perhaps I could ask Claire if she could, and Alex, if they could keep a note, please, so that we can follow up with Andrew and give you that updated information. So I answered the next question from Paul out of order because I was looking at the wrong queue of questions. I apologize for everybody who I jumped over. That was obviously unintentional. Paul asked,
I was going to say I can take this one. So that there's an additional question from Paul. Is there a distinction between the researcher's personal portfolio and the researcher record? So this is one from data terms of different containers. And so one way of thinking about the researcher record is that it's similar to an award. It's a subgrouping of things that are linked to a person in the personal portfolio. And specifically, these are things that are uploaded by the institution that they're currently at. So it's a subset. The personal portfolio is the total set of what the researcher has in Researchfish. Although obviously it could, in theory, be 100% overlapped as well. But they're two different concepts. The personal portfolio is everything for the researcher, and then there are different subsections of that potentially. So hopefully that's clear.
Okay. I think the next item is from Paul Thompson again. I presume we'll end up adding outputs that won't be attributed to a grant if we have no internal CRIS data indicating if the output was the result of UKRI funding, for example. What will happen to these, i.e., can they be removed? I'm not entirely, I mean,
what I think this is getting at is that, so if you're uploading, let's say, publications, because it could also be data sets, it could also be videos, and things of that nature. If you're uploading them for a person, that person might not need to attribute them to all of their grants. They're in Researchfish. They might have other grants. They might have other pieces of work. It might not be directly relevant. So the individual researcher can obviously attribute out over to something that might come a little bit later that this relates to. If they wanted, they could get rid of them and put them into their recycle bin. And so they could clear them out from the things that they see when they're logging in. So they can manage that, but otherwise it's available for them that they could add to other things. And it's worth reminding that, you know, we often talk about UKRI funding, but there are actually many different organizations using Researchfish. And so it might relate to some of those other funders. So hopefully that's helpful there.
Thanks, Gavin. Andy Goddard asks, is there a risk of researchers creating a second duplicate Researchfish ID? If this is a risk, how do we deduplicate? So I think, given that you're talking about researchers creating a second duplicate, I think you mean as in a second Researchfish account. There is a risk, and this does happen sometimes right now in situations where researchers would be accepting a grant award and may have forgotten that they already had a Researchfish account. And we do, I believe, have a process whereby we're able to address this, but it requires them to contact product support to help them with that process. Can somebody else, one of my colleagues, give me a little bit more color on that?
Yeah, so exactly as Colin said, when they get an invitation, they're asked if they already have an existing account to enter the information, essentially their username and password. Sometimes people think that it will be easier for them if they create a duplicate one. So, for example, I want to have one login for one funding organization, another login from a different funding organization. But what usually happens is they realize that actually it just means they would need to add the same information into both of those places. And so usually the researcher is the one that triggers the realization that they've got these two different accounts and that they need to merge them together. When they contact support, we go through a process to try and make sure that the right action is taken so that they don't end up losing anything and that they have one record that has all of that. So obviously the preference is that they enter their existing username and password, and they're strongly advised to do that. But you know, these things do happen, and when they do happen, we do have ways of resolving that.
Great, thank you. Emma Byrne asks, will it show where the records have come from, i.e. our institution or another one? I'm just going to briefly share my screen again because I didn't draw sufficient attention to that. So this was the account for David Porter, Dr. David Porter, the researcher. And so for each of these outcomes, we have this field added by, and as you can see, it shows both, in this case, the name of the research organization and the fact that it was added on behalf of Dr. David Porter and when it was added. So yes, is the answer to that. Okay, Lucy asks, Lucy Wazinski, I'm sorry if I've missed the point. We've never had full access, just the RO Lite, so not fully aware of all all the capability. As such, although I can see it minimizes some researcher burden, does this not increase administrative burden significantly, trying to find publications, etc., to attribute to researchers and their awards? Or is this down to Chris that you mentioned? The info should be pulled in from elsewhere. So, Gavin, did you?
Yeah, so if I understand the question, yes, you can see how it minimizes the burden if the information exists. And so the approach that we have with all of these different strands of interoperability that Colin mentioned at the beginning is that what we're looking to do is, if the information exists somewhere else, if the researchers have spent some time and effort putting it there, we're trying to pull it in rather than making them re-enter it. So, I wouldn't look at it as you're trying to get additional burden for them to do things that they wouldn't otherwise anyway, if you have your own system, if you have your own Chris. These are ways that whatever information is there, even if you just know the person has created the publication, maybe you know the person has created it and they've attributed it to this particular grant, they've acknowledged that funding, then you can load that in. But anything is incrementally making it easier. And if you were, for example, to add a researcher record publication, if they've acknowledged in the funding itself, maybe we just haven't pulled that information yet because of time. But then if there was an acknowledgement for funding that you didn't have in your system, we would go and we would add that in additionally. So we're always scanning and looking for new ways of adding it in. So think of it as trying to maximize the value of any effort that researchers have put into your local system to do things that they would otherwise be doing elsewhere. So if they've already done it in your system, then let's make use of it as much as we can. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Gavin. Emma Byrne asks, how does the researcher record work if or when the individual moves institution? Will it persist, or will they end up with additional accounts? So researcher records, you may have seen, they have a start and an end date. This is with some forward thinking to where we think we might be able to build out from the work that we've done so far. So there is no issue with a researcher having more than one researcher record from multiple institutions. This doesn't create additional accounts. Effectively, this is just a mechanism whereby, as you can see, it's a mechanism whereby an institution can use it to add publications on behalf of researchers. So if they move to a different institution, you could well set an end date if you wish to do so. But it doesn't actually cause a problem within the system or create any additional burden if there's more than one researcher record in place. We aren't currently providing a mechanism for organizations to delete researcher records, and this is for the similar reason why we don't make it easy we don't allow funders to be able to delete grants, because a slip of a finger could result in deleting something that's actually quite useful, but we can do that deletion activity on your behalf if needed. Anything to add to that, Gavin?
No, I think that's exactly right. I was going to grab the next question, which is from Andrew McClellan. Is it possible to get a demo of the DataCite integration? It would be nice to see how the data sets come through, what metadata is required in DataCite, and whether the RO needs to do something to activate it. Is a really good question, and it again comes back to all the different things we're already doing in terms of the interoperability that we have. So we already connect in and harvest information from DataCite and also from different universities' data repositories, depending on the different connectors that are available. I don't think we have a recorded demo specifically for DataCite, but we'd be happy to have a chat with you and walk you through it. But broadly speaking, and I should say, I think we've already shared some of this information with Strathclyde before as part of the interoperability group that we have. But broadly speaking, if you are using a more modern version of the DataCite schema, so I think anything from 3.0 on over, you have the ability to put the funding attribution information, the funding acknowledgement, and for the harvest from data site to work, we need to be able to see the funder and the grant reference, and the grant reference needs to be the same grant reference that the funder considers to be the grant reference, which is the one that the funder has also loaded into Researchfish. So that's a way for you to do that there. It's also important when you're minting the DOI that you follow the DataCite rules to describe what type of data it is. So the field there is resource type general, and that you follow the rules as to how that gets assigned. So a number of organizations were using Dublin Core methodology to create the type. And this was causing problems if there were multiple data sets within a single record, because in Dublin Core, those would be classed as a collection, and in DataCite, they're classed as a data set. So that's causing some challenge for the interoperability there. But broadly speaking, if you have the acknowledgement there, if you have the right kind of a type, we'll be going through and we will harvest it. Even if you don't have the acknowledgement, if it's got the researcher's ORCID and it's connected to their ORCID account, then we will be pulling it through that mechanism. Similarly, some organizations don't include the acknowledgement in the DataCite record, which is obviously the best thing to do because we can pull from there and it's fully available to everybody. But sometimes they put that additional attribution information in their local repository, and we may be able to pick it up through, for example, an OpenAir connector. So there's a number of quite sort of technical pieces there, just sort of covered the highlights. So hopefully that's not too specific for today, but we'll be happy to talk to you in a bit more detail if you would like that, and if anybody else would like that.
Great, thank you. We've got a few more questions coming that have come in. So Paul asks, will an end effect be that there will be the same output in personal records for multiple authors in the same or other organizations? If one author makes the attribution, does this reflect on all the author personal records? So if I'm go on, Gavin. You probably
sorry. This is a bit
all
more
things
in
data model
in the data set of things. So yes. So individuals in Researchfish can independently add the same publication, and in pure Researchfish data terms, these are different records. And so exactly as you described, if you're uploading a researcher record of a single publication across, say, 3 authors, they would each get that record created. Now, if you or they look to add an attribution to a grant, let's say the same grant, if you have the acknowledgement to the grant come up with all 3 of them as well, so you've got the same publication going into 3 records, and you've got 1 or more attributions to the same grant, as that file gets processed, it will create the publication in each of those different personal portfolios, but it will only add a single attribution to a grant, and it will be by default the PI on the grant that would have the attribution added to that version. Now, there's an additional piece of work that Researchfish does to be able to uniquely identify a particular publication across all the different places that a person might add. And so the fact that there are multiple versions of the same publication created in Researchfish, that all resolves down to a single unique identifier so that we can understand all of that. So you don't need to worry about that, and the researchers shouldn't need to worry about it. And the mechanisms to prevent duplication should alert them about that if they tried to do it, that was the reason why that was not able to continue. So hopefully that answers that question.
And Paul also asked, what would happen with multiple uploads from one Chris? So I don't think, so it's perfectly possible to upload multiple times. For example, there is, I believe, a record limit of 1,000 records in a single upload file. So if you had many thousands of publications, you would by force be creating multiple uploads. And the system makes sure that if you do upload a record that would create a duplication because it's previously been uploaded, it will stop that duplication from happening. Gavin, would there be anything else in Paul's question there that
just to say, you've gone through it exactly there, and the reason for that is we wanted to make sure that for the research admin side, you didn't have to try and work out what you previously uploaded and needed to worry about that. So all of the automation that we have should handle that completely perfectly. And there are some organizations who do many different uploads, and so it just makes it easy to have an export from your system, push it into Researchfish, and the logic will work out what's happening. So it's no problem at all, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. There's a similar, if I can, from Peter Iverson around what happens if they put things in the recycle bin. So yes, is the answer. The binned items are prevented from being re-uploaded. So again, that prevention should mean that you don't need to worry about keeping track about it. We don't want to annoy the researcher with adding things in that they've already said they don't want. And we already have this functionality that relates to other parts of interoperability. So for example, sometimes people do put the wrong grant reference in when they're acknowledging a paper in the manuscript, for example. And so we do have instances where researchers have removed it. And it's really important that we keep track of the fact that they've removed it to stop it being added in again, because again, that would just create extra annoyance. So hopefully we won't have that, and we do have mechanisms that should address that.
That looks like we've got to the end of the current set of questions. So obviously, if there are further questions, please do feel free to reach out to probably support@researchfish.com would be the best way to make contact with us. I've got one small request to make before we say thank you for your attendance. I've just said thank you for your attendance, but I have one small request to make perhaps before you drop off, which is that we've got a very short feedback survey. We'd just like to know whether this webinar was useful, covered what you expected. It literally is 2 checkbox questions and a couple of optional text boxes if you want to give us a bit of information. I've just dropped that into the meeting chat, which I think is how we make it available to everybody. And so I think it's just for me to say thank you very much for your time today, for your very probing questions. And we really hope that you're able to make use of this new capability. It's enabled on the platform right now. There's documentation and actually a release that will come out tomorrow will make that slightly more discoverable. It'll be linked into the researcher record page to make it very easy for you to find to actually get to it, as well as a video. And as I think I said at the start, this recording will be made available on our main YouTube channel, and I believe also there'll be a link to it made available in the next newsletter. So just would, on behalf of all my colleagues, say thank you very much. Just check if Claire, Alex, or Gavin have any last words to say, and if not, thank you very much for your time. Any last words? Nope.
Nope.
Okay.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.